17. When I arrived at his office at Scotland Yard, I found my father talking to Chief Inspector Taverner and Mr. Gateskill, the lawyer, who seemed a little upset. "Oh, hello, Charles," said my father as I came in. "Something rather surprising has happened." "Surprising?" exclaimed Mr. Gateskill. "This morning," continued my father, "Mr. Gateskill received a letter from someone called Mr. Agrodopoulos, who is an old friend of Aristide Leonides. In with the letter was Aristide Leonides' will. Mr. Leonides had asked Mr. Agrodopoulos to send the will to Mr. Gateskill after his death." "I have been Mr. Leonides' lawyer for over 40 years, said Mr. Gateskill. "Why didn't he trust me?" He was obviously upset. "When Mr. Gateskill opened the will," my father added, "he decided that we should see it at once." "It's not the same will that I prepared," said Mr. Gateskill. "Mr. Leonides wrote it himself. A very unprofessional thing to do." This was all very interesting, but I didn't understand why I was involved. "Is the will different?" I asked. "I mean, is the money left to someone else?" My father was looking at me. Chief Inspector Taverner was very carefully not looking at me. I felt slightly uneasy. I looked at Mr. Gateskill. "Am I right," he said, "in saying that you are going to marry Miss Sophia Leonides?" "I hope to marry her," I said, "but she doesn't want to become engaged at the moment." "In this will," said Mr. Gateskill, "Aristide Leonides leaves his wife £100,000 and everything else to his granddaughter, Sophia Leonides." I gasped. I hadn't expected this. "But why did he leave everything to Sophia?" I asked. "Mr. Leonides explained his reasons in this letter, which was with the will," said my father, handing me the letter to read. "Dear Gateskill, I am sorry that I have behaved so secretly. Let me explain why. I have always believed that in a family there is one strong character who looks after everyone else. In my family, I was that person, and I have been lucky enough to live a long time and take care of my children and grandchildren. But when I die, someone else must take care of the family. After much thought, I have decided that neither of my sons is the right person to do this. My dearly loved son, Roger, has no business sense and has poor judgment. My son, Philip, is too unsure of himself and is hiding from life. Eustace, my grandson, is very young, and I do not think that he has enough sense and self-control. Only my granddaughter, Sophia, has intelligence, good judgment, and courage, and is fair and generous. I believe she is the best person to take care of the family, including my sister-in-law, Edith de Havilland, to whom I am very grateful for her lifelong care of my children and grandchildren. Now, I must explain why I kept my decision secret from you. I thought it best not to tell the family I was leaving everything to Sophia. I asked you to prepare a will which I read out to all my family. I put both the wills on my desk and covered them with a piece of paper. When the servants came in, I moved up the piece of paper, and we all signed the will that I wrote myself, not the will that you prepared. Please forgive me for not telling you about this. I am an old man and wanted to keep it secret. Thank you, my dear friend, for all the care you have taken while dealing with my affairs. Give Sophia my love, and ask her to take care of my family. Yours, very sincerely, Aristide Leonides." "Extraordinary," I said, after reading the letter. "Most extraordinary," said Mr. Gateskill. "I repeat, I do think my old friend Mr. Leonides could have trusted me." He stood up and left the room, his professional pride obviously hurt. Now it's been explained, it seems obvious, said Taverner. Aristide Leonides was the only person who could have played tricks with that will. We were stupid not to think of it. I remembered Josephine saying how stupid the police were. But she hadn't been there when the will was made, and I didn't think she could guess what her grandfather had done. So why did she say the police were stupid? Was she just showing off? Suddenly, I realized how quiet the room was. I looked up to see that both my father and Taverner were watching me. Sophia knew nothing about this, I said. Nothing at all. She'll be amazed. Will she? Asked my father. There was a pause, which was ended by the sudden loud ring of the telephone on the desk. My father answered. It's your young woman, he told me. She wants to speak to you. It's urgent. I took the receiver from him. Sophia? I said. What's the matter? Charles, is that you? Said Sophia, sounding very upset. It's Josephine. She's been hit on the head and has concussion. The doctor says she may not recover. Josephine's been knocked out, I told my father and Taverner. My father frowned. I told you to look after that child, he said sharply. Chapter 18. Taverner and I were immediately driven to Swinley Dean in a fast police car. On the way, I remembered how Josephine had talked about a second murder. The poor child hadn't known that she was to be the second victim. Josephine must know something about the murder that we didn't. I remembered the snap of the twig in the garden. I should have taken better care of Josephine. Had Magda realized that her daughter was in danger? Was that why she suddenly wanted Josephine to go away to school in Switzerland? As we arrived, Sophia came out to meet us. Josephine, she said, was in the local hospital, and Dr. Gray would telephone as soon as there was any news. How did it happen? Asked Taverner. Sophia led us round to the back of the house and through a door to a small yard. In one corner was an old wash-house. Josephine likes to play here, she explained. The wash-house was small and dark inside, and full of wooden boxes and old broken furniture. Just inside the door was a stone doorstop. It's the doorstop from the front door, Sophia explained. It must have been balanced on top of the door. A booby trap, said Taverner, reaching up a hand to touch the top of the low door. Then he looked at the doorstop. Has anyone touched this? No, said Sophia. I told everyone not to. You're quite right. Who found her? I did. She didn't come in for dinner at 1 o'clock. Nanny said she had seen Josephine go outside about a quarter of an hour before. I said I would go and get her, replied Sophia. Who knew that Josephine liked to play here? Asked Taverner. Everyone in the house knew, Sophia said. No one really comes out here except her. And you can't see this little yard from the house, said Taverner thoughtfully. Anyone could have set that booby trap. He looked up at the door. She was unlucky, he said. It could easily have missed her. Next, Taverner looked at the floor. There were various deep marks in it. It looks as if someone tried the doorstop out first to see just where it would fall. We didn't hear anything, said Sophia. We had no idea until I found her lying face down. Her voice shook. There was blood on her hair. Is that Josephine's? Taverner pointed to a wool scarf lying on the floor. Yes. Using the scarf, Taverner carefully picked up the stone doorstop. There may be fingerprints, he explained, though he spoke without much hope. What are you looking at, Charles? I was examining an old wooden chair with a broken back, which was with the other old furniture. On the seat of the chair were a few small pieces of mud. Interesting, said Taverner. Someone stood on that chair with muddy feet. Now, why was that? I had no suggestions. Taverner shook his head. What time did you find Josephine, Miss Leonides? About 5 minutes past 1? And Nanny saw her going out about 20 minutes earlier. Has anyone else been out here today? I've no idea, said Sophia. But Josephine herself was here after breakfast this morning. So someone set the trap between then and 1:45. Did you notice that the doorstop was missing? Sophia shook her head. It's been too cold to have the door open today, she explained. And do you know where everyone was this morning? I went out for a walk, replied Sophia. Eustace and Josephine had lessons until 12:30, with a break at 10:30. I think Father has been in the library all morning, and Mother was just getting up when I came in at about 12:15. She doesn't get up very early. We went back into the house, and I followed Sophia to the library. Philip and Magda were sitting close together. Philip's face was white, and Magda was crying. Have they telephoned from the hospital yet? Sophia asked. Philip shook his head. Why wouldn't they let me go with her? Cried Magda. My baby, my funny, ugly baby. She hated it when I called her that. She'll die. I know she'll die. Hush, my dear, said Philip. Hush. I felt that I had no place in this sad family scene, so instead I went to find Nanny. She was sitting in the kitchen, crying quietly. This is all because of me, Mr. Charles, because of the awful things I've been thinking. I didn't understand what she meant. There's wickedness in this house, Nanny continued. I didn't want to see it or believe it, but somebody killed Mr. Leonides, and the same somebody has tried to kill Josephine. But why should anyone try to kill Josephine? I asked. You know what she's like, Mr. Charles, Nanny said. She always wants to know things and find out things. You see, she was always a very ordinary little girl, not good-looking like her brother and sister. Her mother sometimes ignored her and said she was ugly. Josephine hated that, and it had a bad effect on her. She started sneaking around and spying on people, but that isn't safe when there's a poisoner about. I murmured in agreement, and then I remembered something. Do you know where Josephine kept her little black book, where she wrote things down? I asked Nanny. I've no idea, Mr. Charles. It wasn't with her when she was found. Had someone taken Josephine's notebook, or had she hidden it in her own room? I thought I would go and look. I went upstairs and stopped. I didn't know where Josephine's room was, but then I heard Taverner calling me. Come in here, he said. I'm in the girls' room. It's a real mess. The small room was indeed a mess. Drawers had been pulled out, and their contents thrown on the floor. Everything had been pulled off the small bed. The chairs had been turned upside down, and the pictures taken down from the wall. Someone had been looking for something. Did anyone hear or see anything? I asked. It seems not, said Taverner. I've checked, and anyone in the house could have done this, and set the booby trap. It could have been Philip, Magda, Nanny, or your girl, Sophia. Brenda was alone all morning. Lawrence Brown and Eustace had a half-hour break from lessons, and Mr. Haviland was in the garden alone. Roger was in his study, and even Clemency didn't go to work today. I've no idea who it was, or what they were looking for. I suddenly remembered where I had seen Josephine last. Wait, I said, and ran out of the room and up the stairs to the attic where Josephine had been detecting. It was dark, and the ceilings were low, but it was a good place to hide things, I thought, as I started to search properly. Indeed, it didn't take me long to find a packet of letters wrapped in brown paper. I read the first letter. Oh, Lawrence, my darling, my dear love, I'm sure everything will be all right. Aristide has been so good to me. I don't want him to suffer, but there can't be any pleasure in living when you're over 80. Soon we shall be together for always. How wonderful it will be when I can call you my dear, dear husband. I love you, love you, love you. I grimly went downstairs and gave Taverner the letters. This might be what someone was looking for, I told him. Taverner looked through the letters and read a few lines. Then he looked up at me with a satisfied expression on his face. So, it was them, he said quietly. Brenda Leonides and Lawrence Brown. It was them the whole time. Chapter 19. From the moment I found the letters, all the sympathy and pity I had felt for Brenda Leonides disappeared completely. She had lied to me and had tried to kill Josephine. But I think it was Lawrence Brown who set that booby trap, said Taverner. That explains what puzzled me about it. Josephine had the letters, but the murderer couldn't find them, so he tried to kill her. But why didn't he just hit Josephine on the head himself? Putting a stone doorstop on top of a door is stupid. It could have missed or not hurt Josephine at all, so why do it? Well, I said, what's the answer? At first, I thought it was to fit in with someone's alibi. But no one has an alibi. But if it was Lawrence Brown, it all makes sense. He doesn't like violence, and he couldn't hit Josephine himself. With the booby trap, he didn't have to see it happen. Yes, I see, I said slowly. It's just like putting the Esserine in the insulin bottle. Exactly. Do you think Brenda knew? I asked. I don't think she helped set the booby trap, said Taverner. But I think the Esserine was her idea, even if she made Lawrence Brown do it himself. And with these letters, there's a clear case against both of them. He looked at me. So, how does it feel to be marrying a very rich girl? He asked. I'd forgotten about the will. Sophia doesn't know yet, I said. Do you want me to tell her? Mr. Gateskill is going to tell everyone tomorrow after the inquest, said Taverner. I wonder what the family will say. Chapter 20. Nothing unusual happened at the inquest, because the police had said that they needed more time to collect the evidence. We were all feeling more cheerful, however, because we'd heard from the hospital that Josephine was not as badly hurt as we thought, and she was getting better quickly. She wasn't allowed any visitors at the moment, not even her mother. Particularly not her mother, murmured Sophia. I made that quite clear to Dr. Gray. Mother would only make a big dramatic scene, which isn't good for someone who's been hit on the head. You think of everything, don't you, darling? I said. Aristide Leonides had been right to choose Sophia, I thought. She was already taking care of the family. After the inquest, Mr. Gateskill came back to Three Gables and made his important announcement. He read Aristide Leonides' letter and then the will itself. It was very interesting to watch. I was just sorry I couldn't watch everyone at the same time. Philip's mouth was shut tightly, and he didn't speak. Magda, however, spoke as soon as Mr. Gateskill finished. "Darling Sophia," she said, "how extraordinary! How romantic! But poor darling Roger! Now he doesn't have the money to save the company. Sophia, you must help Roger." "No," said Clemency. "We don't want anything." Roger stepped forward clumsily. "We don't want any money," he said, holding Sophia's hands. "Clemency and I are going to Barbados to live a quiet life." He smiled. "But if I ever need anything, I'll ask the head of the family." "But, Roger, you can't just go bankrupt and leave the country," said Edith de Haviland. "It makes the family and Sophia look bad, as if we didn't try to help you." Roger put his arms round his aunt and hugged her. "Aunt Edith," he said, "you are a darling, but you don't understand what Clemency and I want." "None of you," added Clemency, annoyed, "understands Roger. You never have, and you never will. Come on, Roger." They left the room as Mr. Gateskill pretended to sort his papers. It was clear that he deeply disliked such family dramas. When I looked at Sophia herself, she was standing up straight and her eyes were calm. She had just inherited an enormous fortune, but my first thought was that now she was alone, separate from the rest of her family. Her grandfather had believed that she was strong enough to be responsible for everyone else, but just then I felt very sorry for her.
"Congratulations, Sophia," said Mr. Gateskill. "You are a very rich woman. If you wish to discuss anything else, I'll be very happy to advise you." "What about Roger?" insisted Edith de Havilland. "Roger," said Mr. Gateskill quickly, "must look after himself. He's a grown man, and he'll never be a successful businessman." He looked at Sophia. "If you save Associated Foods from bankruptcy, Roger is the wrong man to manage it." "I'm not going to save Associated Foods from bankruptcy," said Sophia clearly. "It would be a stupid thing to do." Mr. Gateskill looked at her and smiled to himself. Then he said goodbye and left the family alone together. Everyone was silent for a moment, before Philip stood up. "I must get back to the library," he said. "I have wasted a lot of time." "Father?" Sophia spoke uncertainly. She stepped back as Philip looked at her coldly. "I won't congratulate you," he said. "I am too shocked and humiliated that my father has ignored my lifelong devotion to him. Yes, devotion." For the first time, his emotions broke through. "How could he do this to me?" he exclaimed. "He was always unfair to me. Always." "Oh, Philip," cried Edith de Havilland, "please don't think that." "He never cared for me," said Philip, in a rough, low voice. "It was always Roger. At least Father finally realized that Roger was a fool and a failure." His handsome face was full of jealousy. "He didn't leave Roger anything either." "What about me?" said Eustace. I saw that Eustace was shaking with violent emotion. His face was bright red, and there were tears in his eyes. "How could Grandfather do this to me?" he said, his voice high and angry. "I hate him. I'll never forgive him as long as I live. I wanted him to die. I wanted to get out of this house. Now Sophia is in charge, and I wish I was dead." He rushed out of the room. "He has no self-control," said Edith de Havilland quietly. "I know just how Eustace feels," said Magda. "The poor darling. I must go after him." "Now, Magda." Edith hurried after her. Sophia stayed behind, looking at her father, but Philip again looked at her coldly, quite in control of himself once more. "You've managed things very cleverly, Sophia," he said, and went out of the room. "That was a cruel thing to say," I said to Sophia, holding her in my arms. "Your grandfather shouldn't have done this to you." "He thought I could bear it," said Sophia, "and I can. But I don't like Father and Eustace being so upset. Your mother's all right, but she won't like asking me for money for her new play," said Sophia. "What will you say if she does?" I asked curiously. Sophia stood up very straight. "I'll say no," she said. "It's a bad play, and it will be a failure. It's a waste of money." I laughed. "That's why your grandfather left everything to you," I said. "You're just like him." Chapter 21.
I was sorry that Josephine had missed all the drama. She would have enjoyed it. She was getting better very quickly, and would soon be home. But before she came back, one more important event took place. I was in the garden one morning with Brenda, who said that she needed some exercise, and Sophia. After a while, Brenda said abruptly, "You're giving Lawrence the sack, Sophia. Why?" "We're making other arrangements for Eustace," Sophia said quietly, "and Josephine is going to Switzerland." "Well, you've upset Lawrence very much. He feels you don't trust him." Sophia didn't answer, and at that moment a car arrived in front of the house, and Chief Inspector Taverner stepped out. He went into the house. "Why have the police come back?" said Brenda nervously. "What do they want now?" I thought I knew why they had come, because of the letters. Taverner came out of the house again and walked over to us. He spoke to Brenda in his official voice. "Brenda Leonides, I'm arresting you on suspicion of murdering Aristide Leonides with Esserine on September 19th. Brenda completely lost control of herself. She held on to me and screamed, "No! No, it isn't true! Charles, tell them! I didn't do it! I don't know anything about it! Don't let them take me away! It isn't true! I haven't done anything!" It was a horrible scene. All I could do was try and calm her down. I told her that I would arrange for a lawyer for her, that a lawyer would help her with everything. "Come along, Mrs. Leonides," said Taverner. "We have to go now." "Lawrence," she said, staring at Taverner. "What have you done to Lawrence?" "Mr. Lawrence Brown is also under arrest," said Taverner. At this news, Brenda fell to the ground. The tears fell down her face as Taverner quietly helped her towards the car. Lawrence Brown came out of the house with a police officer, and they all got into the car and drove away. Sophia was pale and upset. "It's horrible, Charles," she said. "You must get her a really good lawyer." She sighed deeply. "But why have they been arrested now?" I explained that the police had found love letters from Brenda and Lawrence. "It is horrible, Sophia," I added. "But isn't it what we wanted? You said yourself it would be all right if the right person had killed your grandfather. Brenda was the right person, wasn't she? Brenda or Lawrence?" "Don't say that, Charles. You make me feel awful." "But it's true, isn't it? Now things can go back to normal, and we can get married. Your family are cleared of suspicion. Of course, none of you really had a motive." Sophia's face suddenly went white. "Except me, Charles," she said. "I had a motive. I knew about the will." "What?" I stared at her. I suddenly felt cold. "I knew that Grandfather had left his money to me. He told me. He said I must look after the family when he was gone." "Why didn't you tell me?" "When there was such confusion with the will, I thought perhaps he'd made a mistake, or changed his mind. I didn't want him to leave everything to me. I was afraid." "Afraid?" I said. "Why?" Because of the murder." So Sophia had been afraid that she would be suspected of murder. I understood now why she had refused to be engaged to me, and why she had desperately wanted to know the truth. As we walked back towards the house, I suddenly remembered something Sophia had said, that she supposed she could murder someone, but only for something really important. Chapter 22. Before we reached the house, we met Roger and Clemency. "Hello, you two," said Roger. "I see the police have arrested that horrible woman and her boyfriend at last. I hope they're both hanged." Clemency frowned. "Don't be so cruel, Roger," she said. "Cruel?" said Roger. "Rubbish. They poisoned a helpless old man. I loved my father, don't you understand? I loved him.
I know, Roger, I know, said Clemency. We went towards the house. Roger and Sophia walked ahead, and I walked behind with Clemency. The police should let us leave now, she told me. Do you want to go so soon? I asked. I'm desperate to go. I looked at Clemency in surprise. Don't you understand, Charles? She continued. I'm fighting for my happiness, and Roger's. I don't want Roger to stay here in England. I want him to come away with me. I want him all to myself, right away from his family. I hadn't realized how desperately Clemency loved Roger. I remembered what Edith de Havilland had said, that she loved her family, but not too much. Had Edith been thinking of Clemency? A car drove up to the front door, and Josephine and Magda got out. Apart from the bandage round her head, Josephine looked very well. I want to look at the fish in the lake, she said. Darling, said Magda, come in and lie down for a while first. I'll get you some soup. I don't want to lie down, said Josephine, and I hate soup. I'm quite all right. Magda looked doubtful. I knew that Josephine had been kept safely in hospital until Brenda and Lawrence had been arrested. I'll look after her, I said to Magda, as Josephine went to see the fish. When we got there, I asked Josephine if she wanted to hear about what had happened. Do you know that your grandfather left all his money to Sophia? Mother told me, Josephine said, sounding bored. Anyway, I knew already. I heard Grandfather tell Sophia. Were you listening at the door again? Yes, I like listening, said Josephine. I heard what Grandfather said about me. Nanny doesn't like it when I listen. I changed the subject to something I thought would excite her. Chief Inspector Taverner has arrested Brenda and Lawrence. Yes, I know, she said, still bored. How can you know? It's only just happened. We passed their car on the road, she said. Brenda and Lawrence were inside, so of course I knew they'd been arrested. I'm sorry, I said, but I had to tell the police about the letters. I found them in the attic. You could have told them yourself if you hadn't been knocked out. Josephine touched her head carefully. I could have been killed, she said, sounding pleased. I told you it was time for the second murder. It was stupid to hide those letters in the attic. I knew Lawrence had hidden something there when I saw him coming out of the attic. But I thought... I stopped as we heard Edith de Havilland's voice calling, Josephine! Josephine! Come here at once! Josephine sighed. It's Aunt Edith, so I have to go. She ran across the garden, and I followed more slowly. When Josephine had gone inside, I was left alone with Edith de Havilland. She looked very tired and old. I'm glad it's over, she said to me. Do you think Brenda and Lawrence will be found guilty? I don't know, I admitted. I don't know how much evidence the police have. There are love letters. Edith looked very grim. I'm not happy about this, Charles. I don't like Brenda. In fact, I dislike her very much. But I feel it's my responsibility to make sure she's treated fairly. And Lawrence? Lawrence is a man, she said. He must look after himself. But Aristide would never forgive me if... She didn't finish. Instead, she suggested that we should go in for lunch, and I explained that I was driving back to London. Will you take me with you? She asked, and not tell anyone. I was surprised, but I did as she asked. We didn't speak much on the journey. When I asked her where I should stop, she said, Harley Street. Harley Street was where all the best London doctors worked. I felt uneasy. I hope, I began, and stopped. That's why I didn't want to tell anyone, Edith said.
They'll just make a fuss." "I'm very sorry," I said. "Don't worry," she said. "I've had a very good life." She smiled. "And it's not finished yet." Chapter 23. After a quick visit to my father, who was busy, I went out for a drink with Chief Inspector Taverner. "Well," he said, "the case is over at last." But he didn't sound very happy about it. "Do you think Brenda and Lawrence will be found guilty?" I asked him. "It's impossible to say," he replied. "There's no proof, and no definite or direct evidence against them. It's the same in a lot of murder cases." "What about the letters?" "The letters say things like, 'It won't be long now,' but they never mention poison. They could argue that all they meant was that Aristide Leonidas was so old he was sure to die soon." "And what do you think? Are they guilty?" I asked. He looked at me with no expression on his face. "I don't think anything, Charles. I've done my duty, and it's been decided to send them to trial." That's how I knew that Taverner wasn't satisfied. A few days later, I talked to my father about the case. Like Taverner, he said that there was enough evidence against Brenda and Lawrence to send them to trial. "That's not what I'm talking about," I said. "With your experience, do you think they're guilty?" "To be honest with you, Charles, I just don't know. They could be guilty, but I'm just not sure, and I wish I was." We were silent for a while before my father said, "So tell me, Charles, what do you think? Do you think that one of the Leonidas family is the real murderer?" "Yes, I do," I finally admitted, "because that's what they think themselves." "Do they?" said my father. "That's very interesting." "Only Roger is sure it's Brenda," I continued. "The others don't think so." "So, who do you think it is?" my father asked quietly. "Sophia?" "No, of course not, no." "But you're not completely sure, are you?" said my father. "Even if you won't admit it. What about the others?" "I can think of reasons, though not always good reasons, why they all could have killed Aristide Leonidas," I said. "Philip has always been very jealous of Roger, and he could have poisoned his father to make sure that Roger's company went bankrupt. I don't think Magda is involved, and although she suddenly wants Josephine to go to school in Switzerland, I think it's because she's afraid that Josephine knows something, and she would never hit Josephine on the head." "Why not, Charles?" said my father. "Don't you read the news? Mothers often dislike one or more of their children. Who else is there? What about Roger?" "I'm sure that Roger didn't kill his father, but his wife might have done it. I told him about my conversation with Clemency. And Edith," I continued. "Edith de Havilland might have done it, if she had a good reason, but I don't know why." "Would she hit the child on the head?" "No," I said slowly. "I don't believe she would. Which reminds me, Josephine said something that doesn't fit in, but I can't quite remember what it was." "You'll remember soon," said my father. "Anyone else?" "Well," I said, "it could be Eustace. He didn't like his grandfather, and he has been behaving very strangely. And he's the only one who I think could knock out Josephine if she knew something about him. And she does seem to know everything. She writes it down in a little book." I stopped. "What's the matter?" asked my father. "I've just remembered what Josephine said," I exclaimed. "We thought that Josephine's room was searched because of the letters. But Josephine told me that it was Lawrence who hid the letters in the attic. She saw him and found the letters, but left them where they were." "Well, That means that it wasn't the letters that someone was looking for in Josephine's room. It must have been something else. Her little black book where she writes everything down. If Josephine still has that book... I stood up. Then she still isn't safe, said my father. Is that what you were going to say? Yes, I said. She won't be out of danger until she leaves for Switzerland. I think you're right about the danger, said my father. You should go to Three Gables at once. Is it Eustace? I asked him desperately. Clemency? I think the facts point clearly in one direction, my father said gently. I'm surprised you don't see it yourself. I think... At that moment, a police officer knocked on the door. I know you asked not to be disturbed, sir, but Miss Leonides is on the telephone. She says it's urgent. I quickly picked up the telephone and heard Sophia's voice say desperately, Charles, it isn't over. The murderer is still here. What's wrong, Sophia? Is it Josephine? It's not Josephine, said Sophia. It's Nanny. Josephine didn't drink her cocoa and left it on a table. Nanny didn't want to waste it, so she drank it. Poor Nanny. Is she very ill? Oh, Charles, said Sophia. She's dead. Chapter 24. It was like a terrible dream. Taverner and I drove back quickly to Swinley Dean, just as we had before. On the journey, I kept saying to myself that it hadn't been Brenda and Lawrence. They had fallen in love with each other and written romantic letters, but they hadn't poisoned Aristide Leonides or Nanny. As we went through the front door, I saw a big pile of luggage in the hall. Clemency came down the stairs. You're just in time to say goodbye, Charles, she said. We're leaving tonight. But surely you can't go now, I said with surprise. Nanny is dead. Nanny's death has nothing to do with us, said Clemency. Roger and I were upstairs packing, and we didn't come down at all when Josephine's cocoa was on the hall table. Can you prove that? I said. Roger and I are going away, said Clemency angrily. Why would we want to poison Nanny? You might not have meant to poison Nanny. We wouldn't poison Josephine either. But Josephine knows a lot about people, I said. I stopped as Josephine herself appeared eating an apple. Her eyes shone with excitement. Nanny's been poisoned, she said. Just like Grandfather. It's very exciting, isn't it? Aren't you upset about it? I demanded. Didn't you like Nanny? Not really. She was always telling me not to do things. Do you like anybody, Josephine? Asked Clemency. I love Aunt Edith, Josephine said. I love her very much. And I could love Eustace if he let me, but he's so horrible to me. I won't tell him what I found out, that now I know. There was a moment's silence. Josephine stared at Clemency. I heard a noise from behind one of the doors, but when I opened it, there was no one there. I felt uneasy. As Edith de Havilland came down the stairs, I took hold of Josephine's arm and led her firmly into an empty room. I made her sit down in a chair while I sat opposite her. Now, Josephine, I said, we're going to have a talk. What exactly do you know? Do you know who poisoned your cocoa? Josephine nodded. And you know who poisoned your grandfather? Josephine nodded again. And who knocked you on the head? Again, Josephine nodded. Then you're going to tell me everything, now, and then we'll tell the police. I won't, said Josephine. I won't tell the police anything. They're stupid. They thought Brenda and Lawrence did it. I didn't think so, so I made a test, and now I know I'm right. She sounded very pleased with herself. I tried hard to be patient. I know you're very clever, Josephine. She looked pleased. But don't you realize that you're in danger? Of course I am, said Josephine. In some books, lots of people are killed. This isn't a detective story. This is real life. You must tell me what you know. You don't understand, said Josephine. I might not want to tell. I might be fond of the person. She paused. And if I do tell, she continued, I'll do it properly, with everybody sitting together. I'll talk about all the clues, and then say suddenly, it was you. She pointed her finger just as Edith de Havilland entered the room. Josephine, throw that apple away, said Edith, and wash your hands. I'm taking you out in the car. She looked at me. It's safer out of the house. We'll go and get an ice cream. Josephine looked pleased. Can I have two? Perhaps, said Edith. Now go and get your coat. It's cold outside today. Charles, can you go with her? I must quickly write a few letters. She sat down at the desk, and I went upstairs with Josephine. Sophia came into the room, looking pale and nervous as Josephine was getting ready. Charles, she said with surprise. I didn't know you were here. I'm going out with Aunt Edith, said Josephine importantly. We're going to have ice creams. Sophia frowned as we went back downstairs to find Edith, who was just putting her two letters into envelopes. It's quite a nice day, said Edith. Cold, but clear. She was silent for a moment, looking down at the letters in her hand. Then she turned and kissed Sophia. Goodbye, dear, Edith said. Don't worry too much. Some things just have to be accepted. She and Josephine got into the car and waved to us as they drove off. I suppose it's better to keep Josephine away for a while, I said, but she must tell us what she knows. She probably doesn't know anything, Sophia said. She's just showing off and making herself look important. I think it's more than that, I said. Do they know yet what poison was in the cocoa? They think it's Aunt Edith's heart medicine. There was a bottle full of pills, but now it's empty. Isn't the medicine kept locked up? Yes, replied Sophia, but the key is quite easy to find. But who was it? I said. What do you think, Sophia? I don't know, she whispered. It's like a bad dream. Come outside with me, Charles. It's safer outside. I'm afraid to stay in this house. Chapter 25. We stayed outside in the garden for a long time. We didn't talk about the murders. Instead, Sophia talked fondly about Nanny, the games they had played with her, and the stories she had told them. I think this made Sophia feel better. I wondered what Taverner was doing. More policemen had arrived, and Nanny's body had been taken away. At last, it was almost dark. We should go inside, said Sophia, with a shiver. Aunt Edith and Josephine haven't come back yet. Surely they should be back by now. I felt uneasy. What had happened to them? We went inside and had tea with Magda. Philip stayed in the library. Magda didn't speak much, except to ask, Where are Edith and Josephine? They're out very late. I felt even more uneasy, so I went to speak to Taverner. The police will let us know if there's any news, I told Sophia, who was alone in the room when I got back. I'm worried, Charles, she said. Something must have happened. It's not really late yet. She kissed me goodbye, said Sophia, with a strange expression on her face. I didn't understand what she meant. We sat there for a while, pretending to read. It was 6:30 when Taverner opened the door, and his serious face warned us that something was wrong. I'm sorry, he said. I have bad news. We found Edith de Havilland's car at the bottom of the nearby stone quarry. Both people inside are dead, killed immediately. Josephine! Magda was standing at the door. Her voice rose as she cried, Josephine, my baby! Sophia put her arms round her mother. "Wait a moment," I said, as I remembered something. Edith de Havilland had not been carrying any letters when she got into the car. I ran out to the hall and found the letters on the table, half hidden behind a vase. The first letter was addressed to Chief Inspector Taverner, and I stood beside him as he read it. "When you read this letter, I expect I will be dead. I wish to accept full responsibility for the deaths of Nanny and my brother-in-law, Aristide Leonides. I swear that Brenda Leonides and Lawrence Brown are innocent. Dr. Chavas of 783 Harley Street will confirm that I have only a few more months to live. I prefer to end my life in this way and save 2 innocent people from being sent for trial for a murder they did not commit. Edith de Havilland." Sophia, too, read the letter. "Aunt Edith," she whispered. "But why Josephine? Why did she take Josephine with her?" Then, at last, I saw everything clearly. I realized that I was still holding Edith's second letter in my hand. It was addressed to me. I tore the envelope open, and Josephine's little black notebook fell out. I opened it and saw the writing on the first page. "We were wrong, Charles, weren't we?" Sophia whispered. "Aunt Edith didn't do it." "No," I said. "She didn't." "It was Josephine, wasn't it? It was Josephine." Together, we looked down at the first page in the little black notebook. "Today, I killed grandfather." Chapter 26. Afterwards, I wondered how I could have been so blind. The truth was so obvious. Josephine, and only Josephine, was vain and self-important. She had loved to talk about the murder, and about how clever she was, and how stupid the police were. Because she was a child, I had never thought that Josephine could be the murderer. But both murders could easily have been committed by a child. In fact, her grandfather himself had told Josephine exactly what to do, and she read so many detective stories that she would know about fingerprints. She had attacked herself, not really realizing that she could have been killed. There was a clue: the mud on the seat of the old chair. Josephine was the only person who would need to climb up on a chair to balance the heavy stone doorstop on the top of the door. Obviously, it had missed her a few times. The marks in the floor showed that. But she had tried again, using her scarf so she didn't leave any fingerprints. Finally, the doorstop had hit her. We had all thought that Josephine was in danger, just as she wanted. She knew something. She had been attacked. I realized how she had carefully shown me, on purpose, where the attic was, so I found the letters, and she had made the mess in her room herself. But when she came back from hospital, Josephine was unhappy. The case was over. Brenda and Lawrence had been arrested, and she herself wasn't getting much attention. So she stole Edith de Havilland's heart medicine, poisoned her own cocoa, and left the cup on the hall table. Did she know that Nanny would drink it? Possibly. Did Nanny, with a lifetime of experience with children, suspect Josephine? And Edith? Had she suspected too, or had she known? I looked down at the letter in my hand. "Dear Charles, this letter is just for you, and for Sophia, if you want to show it to her. I want someone to know the truth. I found Josephine's little notebook hidden in the garden. It confirms what I already suspected. I don't know if what I'm doing is right or wrong, but my life is nearly over, and I don't want Josephine to suffer for what she has done. If I am wrong, I hope I can be forgiven. I did it out of love. Bless you both, Edith de Havilland. I gave the letter to Sophia, and when she had read it, we opened Josephine's little black notebook. Today I killed grandfather. As we turned the pages, we saw Josephine's horribly childish motives for murder. Here are the important entries. Grandfather wouldn't let me do ballet dancing, so I made up my mind I would kill him. Then we should go to London to live, and Mother wouldn't mind me doing ballet. I don't want to go to Switzerland. I won't go. If Mother makes me, I will kill her too, if I can get some poison. Eustace made me very angry today. He says I am only a girl and that my detecting is silly. He wouldn't think I was silly if he knew it was me who did the murder. I like Charles, but he is rather stupid. I have not decided yet who I shall say has done the murder. Perhaps Brenda and Lawrence. Brenda is horrible to me, but I like Lawrence. Her last words were, I hate Nanny. I hate her. She says I'm only a little girl. She says I show off. She's making Mother send me away. I'm going to kill her too. I think Aunt Edith's medicine will do it. If there is another murder, then the police will come back and it will all be exciting again. Nanny's dead. I'm glad. I haven't decided yet where I'll hide the bottle with the pills. Perhaps in Aunt Clemency's room, or in Eustace's room. When I am dead, I shall leave this notebook behind for the Chief of Police, and they will see what a great criminal I was. I closed the book. Sophia was crying. Oh, Charles, it's so awful. She's such a monster, but I also feel so much pity for her. I felt the same. I had liked Josephine, but she had been born with something wrong with her. She was the crooked child of the little crooked house. What would have happened to her, Sophia asked me, if she had lived? I don't know, I said. Perhaps she would have been sent to a special school, or a child's prison. It's better this way, Sophia said with a shiver. But I don't like Aunt Edith taking the blame. It was her decision, I said. I don't suppose anyone will find out. Brenda and Lawrence will be free to go, and there won't be a trial. And you, Sophia, I added, holding her hands, will marry me. We'll go away together, and you won't have to think about your family for a while. You can think about me instead. Aren't you afraid to marry me, Charles? Said Sophia, looking straight into my eyes. Not at all, I said. Why should I be? Poor little Josephine inherited all the worst from your families. But you, Sophia, have inherited the best. Your grandfather thought so, and he, my darling, was always right. I love you, Charles, said Sophia, and I will marry you. She looked down at the notebook. Poor Josephine. Poor Josephine, I said. What really happened, Charles? My father asked me. I never lie to my father. It wasn't Edith de Havilland, I told him. It was Josephine. My father nodded his head gently. Yes, he said. I thought it was. Poor child.